Hey everybody, welcome to Command Post Cohort. Got Craig here and Andrew with me.
Hey everybody.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about some of our experiences in Iraq.
Yeah.
Uh, there's, I think there was a lot that we were able to learn from our lessons as young leaders,
Yeah.
being deployed as a platoon leader. One of the first, really coming out of college is like your first real job.
Yeah. As a young officer, that's what you do first.
Yeah, and there was a
Congratulations, son.
lot.
Here's 25 to 35 people you're in charge of.
Yeah, and so I think that we wanted to talk about that a little bit today and share some of the things that stood out to us because anytime you're into a new leadership position, there's challenges, especially if it's your first one. And so we wanted to go all the way back, we'll call it several years ago, and talk about our
That's
time as young lieutenants.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I liked Craig's vague timeline there. Thank you for that. So I want to tell a story about really the first night that we got into some pretty good contact in Iraq when I was a young platoon leader. So I was 24 years old, and I was in charge of about 25 people, including myself, in four striker vehicles. And the area where we operated in Iraq was very rural and desert. So there was just a couple of villages around, but mostly just kind of rolling hills, desert. So we'd been there about a little less than 3 months, maybe at that point, and I've been before we deployed, so before we got to Iraq, and then for 3 months there, we'd been training together, operating together, working together, for living together for about 3 months, and training, for 6, 8, a year before that. So we knew each other pretty well. We knew what to do. We knew the technical aspects of the vehicles and the weapon systems, and what we were gonna do. Right. We had plans, and we because of all that time we'd spent together working and training, we had trust in each other, and we also understood each other's intent. Now, to be clear, like I was a platoon leader, right, and everybody knew that, so I didn't have to rub it in anybody's face, right. But if I asked, I could say one or two words, and they would know what I meant, and they would go and do it, because they knew uh, it was in the best interest. So it was one night. It was we went out. So we got our four trucks, and we were going to go patrol an area of the desert with some Iraqi soldiers, just kind of watch over the towns and see if there's any movement at night and things like that. So it's funny because I kind of got a weird feeling before we left. I looked up, and it was a full moon, and we'd been there for about 3 months, and things to me were just kind of stacking up that would tell me that if it was going to happen, it was going to happen tonight. I don't know why I thought that. That might be another
Yeah.
podcast, but
Hey, those feelings are real sometimes, man. Sometimes it's you get the
yeah.
the
So
feeling beforehand.
I don't know. So I shared that anyway. I shared that with my platoon before we rolled out. I was briefing them. Hey, we're going to roll out. Here's where we're going. Here's what we're doing. You have this job. You have this job. Those kind of things, right before we left the gate. And so I shared that with them. I was like, guys, I don't know why, but I'm feeling a kind of way about this, that something may happen tonight. So please just be sharp and watch out. And I guess it worked. I don't know, but we rolled out and we linked up with the Iraqis that we were going to start patrolling with. And they had two Humvees, I think, if I can recall, and probably about eight to 10 Iraqi soldiers. And this was, in the dark of night in Iraq, in the deserts of Iraq. And we start moving out from their base where we picked them up. Um, and the first Iraqi Humvee hit an IED, immediately burst into flames. Now, the Iraqis, at, at that time, I don't know how they are now, but if something like that happens, anytime they get shot at, anytime there's an IED explosion, they immediately jump out and start shooting in all directions. It's just, that's what they did. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
that was
we
their
were,
standard at that time. That was what
yeah, yeah.
they
And,
were
and
trained to do. Really.
they don't have the equipment that we did, to kind of look further out and to really kind of see anything. So they just did what they thought would protect them, which is get out of the trucks and start firing in all directions. So we were trailing behind them a little bit, so we were able to like kind of spread out some in our trucks, and then start developing the situation. As the truck was on fire, I knew that was going on. The Iraqis were shooting. I knew there was going to be casualties, right? But this ended up being the really the first time we kind of got into contact. As I was 24 years old, and a lot of my soldiers were young, and this was their first deployment as well. And a few NCOs that were experienced, so that helped out. But this is kind of the first test, right? And that's one thing you always hear in the military. You don't know how you're going to react until the bullets start flying. And I have found that you end up being the person you kind of always knew you were. Now I say that because to me it becomes important because that was, like I said, the first contact, right? So I felt the immediate surge of adrenaline, and my heart started pounding, and maybe my breath caught up a little bit, but I also knew, I kind of already knew what we had to do immediately because of all the training we had and things like that. So we dropped the ramp on the trucks, and we all started getting out to secure the area. And I got on the radio to calling my headquarters and telling them what kind of happened. And got on the ground and linked up with the Iraqi that was in charge. And I grabbed my medic and pulled him over with me. And the Iraqis had pulled some casualties out of the burning Humvee. And so I sent my medic up there to help them out, and I knew they were gonna need a medevac. And again, it was in the dark of night, and the Humvee was on fire, and Iraqis were shooting in all directions, and I had to send my medic to go take care of what was going to be probably fatal injuries. And I remember right before I got off my truck, and my heart was beating, and my breath was getting fast, but I kind of had this cool calmness. But I also knew it was my first time, and so in my truck I had Roy. He was a senior NCO on my truck, so he was an E5, and he was in charge of the truck with me, right? And before I got off the truck, I grabbed him by the collar and said, "Don't let me do anything stupid." And then we got off the truck. And I know that guy. Sorry, Collie. I love him to death to this day because we had a great relationship, and he did not let me do anything stupid. So we got directed in the NCOs, which they were already doing anyway, really, to get the perimeter secured, and the medic was up there treating them, and because we're still firing. So I asked one of the other NCOs, ask them to tell them, hey, we got it, we're looking out, there's nothing out there, you can stop firing. And then I turned to one of my other soldiers, it literally wasn't his job usually to do this, but he grabbed the radio. He had the radio. I was like, calling a 9 line. And I picture it in my brain right now. It's green in my brain because we had on night vision goggles.
Yeah.
I can still see him sitting there, kneeling down in the desert, calling in a 9 line medevac for these Iraqis. And in my brain, I just like checked it off, right? Because I knew he had it. So he was able to get the 9 line called in, and he was updating me, hey, birds are inbound, 5 minutes. So directing this NCO to go and help get a litter together to pick up these casualties. I got the report from the medic, how they were doing and how many there were. And so there ended up being 2. And so we set up an LZ, off a couple hundred meters from where the contact was. And again, it was the desert, so it was kind of wide open. We could see lots, and there was lots of area for a helicopter to land. And we got the package, so to speak, kind of organized, right? So the 2 casualties, and all the soldiers and me that were going to lead this thing out to the helicopter when it landed. So my radio guy, the guy that called it in, he's updating me. Hey, they're inbound. They're 30 seconds. We can see them coming in the dark. And then so they landed, and we started moving out towards the helicopters. And this is one thing I did that was not that I tripped up on and messed up, because like when the helicopter lands, even if it's your helicopter, you called it in, you're the guys, you do not approach it. What happens is, what's supposed to happen, the crew chief comes out of the helicopter and then tells you to come to the helicopter. You don't go up to the helicopter. They don't like that a lot of reasons. So I just got so, I got so much adrenaline going. I want to get, I want to do it all. So I said, come on, let's go. So we started moving up towards the helicopter, and the crew chief jumps out. It's like, whoa, 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 stop right there. He like ran towards us. I was like, no, 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 sit down. Okay, right,
Yeah.
right. Sorry, guys, take a knee. So we wrote there. He's like, the check's all right. He asked us some questions. All right, come on. He said, keep your head low. And the boys went on and loaded up the casualty into a helicopter, and we went back to the trucks. The helicopter took off and uh, took the Iraqis to the aid station. Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I know that's a lot. There's something that there's a couple things really that stood out to me that I kind of wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
is so you talk about that moment right before you dismount the vehicles, and I
Mm.
know how sometimes that in itself can be chaotic. A lot of times with strikers, you got a lot of moving pieces there, but
Yeah.
you grab that NCO and you had that trust to basically ask for a little bit of accountability there to make sure you were
Yeah.
operating for the team. What do
Yeah.
you think enabled you to have that type of relationship to where you
Yeah.
could ask that of one of your team members in
Yeah.
a very critical time there?
Yeah. That's one of the things that makes that particular part of the story so rich to me. So like I said, he was the NCO on the truck there, and I had four trucks, an NCO on each one. And he was an NCO in charge of my truck, so making sure it got maintained, making sure the soldiers that were on it had their weapon systems maintained, had all their stuff, and the truck was ready to go when I needed to go. And he would be in charge of the dismount team that came out with me. So we had been working together very closely for over a year at that point. So we knew each other very well. We talked all the time. We spent a lot of nights together in training
Yeah,
and in Iraq. At that point, like I said, 3 months or so, and we all lived together in Iraq
yeah,
in one big open room. We slept on cots. We eventually got beds, but
yeah. I
so like
think that's one thing that expedites building that trust
yeah,
when you're deployed, because you're living together. And
mhm,
so there is no 9 to 5. It's a 24-hour operation.
yeah,
You're always around each other. And so it comes down to repetitions. You've got a lot more repetitions of communications and talking with each other to help
yeah,
build that trust, even as opposed to, being back in garrison, wherever you're stationed at. There's still a little bit of an advantage once you're deployed, um,
yeah.
of time together, which I think really does help that.
Yeah, in training, right? We knew what we were going to do. We'd worked together so much. We had a plan, but we'd never to that point really hadn't tried it out, right?
Yeah.
When things were really happening, everybody knew what to do, right? And then it happened. So there's a truck on fire. It's the dark of night. The Iraqis are shooting in all directions. I had four trucks dropping ramp and people getting out all at once, and I'm in charge of all of this chaos.
And
And
it's
so
one of those things where it's always easy in training, because
yeah,
in training it's training, and now all of a sudden it's
yeah.
real.
Yeah,
These
I didn't
are
know if there were any more IEDs out there. I didn't know if there
yeah,
was any enemy out there trying to shoot us from the wood line. We had an
and
idea, right? Because we could see some, but we didn't know for sure. And so there's unknowns, and we knew, technically and tactically what we had to do because of all the training we've done. But yeah, I didn't know for sure. Right? I still had that idea in my brain that, oh, you never know what can happen until the bullets start flying, right?
mhm,
A little bit of self doubt, right? In the
yeah,
initially in the heat of the moment, right when it started, and yeah, because of that trust I had in him, So I was a platoon leader, lieutenant, and my platoon sergeant was an E7, a sergeant first class, and this guy, he was an E5. He was a sergeant. He'd been in the army, you know, 5 years or so, maybe at that point, four
yeah,
years. So like this wasn't like my right hand man really by paper, right? By the way
right,
the army is typically organized. This is a guy
mhm,
that he was just in charge of one truck.
Yeah.
And not to put that down on him, because I trust him so completely and I'd worked with him so much. I had confidence in his competence,
Yeah.
right? And then I knew that I could turn to him and say, "Hey, I'm having a moment. I'm having a little bit of self doubt here right now, and I need you
Yeah.
to have my back in case I need it."
Yeah.
It didn't quite come out that way. I mean, grabbing him by his collar,
Yeah. Yeah.
don't let me do anything
Well,
stupid.
yeah. But it is, I mean, that goes to, you talk about the training and the amount of time you spent with each other.
Mm,
That, that entire organization, your team, that platoon, it spent, at that point, probably close to a year, 9 months
yeah,
or so, training together. And training is a very crucial piece, no matter if you are running a small business or you're running a military team. How you train your team members and your organization is critical.
yeah,
And one thing I'd like to highlight from that story is you mentioned that the individual who actually called in the nine line,
yeah,
that would typically not be their primary role.
yeah,
But in those scenarios, those situations, a lot of times, me and you both know that you don't always just do what your primary role is. And
yeah,
so I
yeah,
think that highlights the importance of cross training. And just because, your team has designated roles and standards for what everybody does, is key to try to ensure that you cross train your team.
yeah. It was not his job. He just, we had a typical operating procedure of who would man the radio and who would that. But when it comes down to it, sometimes you have to assign tasks to people that don't normally have that task, because the person that normally does is out or is doing something else or is not right there by you. So I knew that he had the ability and the sense to do that and could handle such a task. And he had the radio, and I needed him to call it in. So I gave him the task, and he had all the information that he needed to do that. And I think he felt empowered and confident in himself to do that.
So I think with cross training, it's something that's overlooked a lot of times. As it's looked at as a
Mhm.
nicety, something that is good when you have some extra time, or maybe in the future we'll get to
Yeah,
that. But the importance of it is when you do have some type of significant event, and it doesn't just have to be a catastrophic military operation. It can be, a weather event at work. Maybe the
yeah,
the snowstorm kept your primary fabricator from being at the shop today. Well, there's a reason
yeah,
that, a month ago he spent 2 days with someone else showing him how he fabricates these particular parts, or maybe it's your
mhm,
maintenance team and how they go about diagnosing your critical equipment when it goes down. And there's a lot of second and third order effects that can be prevented with some good cross training. And so I thought it was good to
yeah.
highlight that in your story there.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right, man. Because yeah, so everybody is trained how to the 9 steps of a nine, but to have radio, make sure it's monitored on the right stations, and to carry around the radio and be able to respond to what I think is important is when I want him to call get on the phone and call the higher headquarters,
Hmm.
right? Which can be kind of nerve wracking sometimes, and then receive that information and relate it to me in a timely fashion was important, and keep everybody updated. That's something he really wasn't his job. But yeah,
Right.
because of cross training and witnessing and training we've had before, he was able to do that and without missing a beat.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to a testament of the training and preparation, because the more you prepare with, um, I feel like these events are a good um, description or a good
Mm.
example of the end state. Because when you're leading a team, if you do a good job with communication, you do a good job with setting standards, making sure that there's always a plan for what's going on. All of these, some of the things that we've talked about in the past episodes of if
Yeah.
you take care of those blocking and tackling type activities,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
end result is this. You were in a very complex scenario, and the first time's always in the middle of the night.
So,
Usually,
no, for some reason, it's always in the middle of the night.
yeah, like this stuff never happens when it's 65 and sunny outside.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it's always bad weather in the middle of the night. You're having to do everything through night vision. But because of all that preparation and all those little building block steps that at the time can be taken for granted, it's real easy for someone to say, oh, well, we'll worry about that later. But if you take care of all those building blocks as you progress as a team, when you are faced with a challenge like that, especially as a new
Yeah.
leader, you know,
Yeah.
it's always interesting. Like you said, we always have that idea of what's it going to be like the first time the bullets are flying. We're in contact with the
And
enemy, and it's the result of what type of preparation and training did we do beforehand. It's not about that
yeah.
moment. You hear the saying a lot of times. Nobody really rises to the occasion. You fall back to your training, and so it is. It's a testament, I think, though, to all the preparation that the leaders put in beforehand. So when things do go well, um, it is you're falling back to that
Yeah.
training. It's not, unfortunately, it's usually not like the movies make it out to be. You get those
Yeah.
on occasion, but generally speaking, it is the foundational of that training and what has been expected out of that team for the past 9 months, and now they can react and successfully navigate that scenario.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like the last thing that I want to talk about. So once it happened, right? It's a dark night. There's gunfire, a truck burning, casualties, people moving everywhere very fast with live ammunition and rifles, and trucks driving different directions and dramps dropping and people running out. And I was in charge of all of it, right? And this really, again, like the first kind of time, right? And because of the training and and all that, we all kind of knew what to do and how to do it. Um, but you never know, right? So I still had that bit of nervousness, right? That my heart was still beating really fast because again, fire and gunfire and dark night and all that. But I knew that I had two things going for me. One was, that I knew I had trust, faith, and confidence in everybody in the team to know what they had to do and to do it properly. And then I also knew that I had to play my role, right, which was to be directive and calm and controlling. Because if I wasn't, then like, even though luckily there wasn't any enemies standing by waiting to shoot at us, they just planted an IED and went off. It still could have been a lot worse. So I had to keep control of myself and trust in myself um, to be able to do the things that I knew I had to do. Even though I had a little, my sergeant with me to help me just in case.
Yeah, but it's important to be that calming force. We earlier we were talking about the being the duck, and
Oh yeah.
I like to use the example of when you're in a stressful situation as a leader to think about
Mhm.
being a duck on the surface, and what everyone can see is you're calm and composed. And just like Andrew said, you were able to go around and direct things and ensure that others may start to panic, but when they look to the leader is calm and composed, then that is
Mhm.
infectious. Uh,
Yes.
the
Yes.
flip side is, even as a leader, you may be under the surface in your mind, be paddling like them little duck feet go. And and sometimes those little duck feet are moving, 90 miles an hour, but that's not what everybody sees. Everybody sees that duck just calmly gliding across the top of the
Moving
water.
on more. Yeah.
And so just the same reason as if the leader maintains his composure, Um, if you don't, if the leader then panics, that can become problematic because that grows too. You can either be the calming force or incite the panic, which you don't want to do. So you want to make sure that you can maintain that composure throughout. And I think this is a good example of even when you are as a new leader going, man, this is the first time. Am I how am I going to perform? You know, you've built that trust, or you
Yeah.
got somebody kind of looking out for you, but you were able to maintain your composure, play your role in it, and ensure that your team comes out successful on the other side.
Yeah. It was a challenge. Yeah.
It
Yeah. The first time's always a little nerve-wracking.
Yeah, and it is. I think every time, and even as I think back about progressing through the military, there were always new first. Maybe it wasn't the first time in contact. Maybe it wasn't the first
Mm,
IED, but at some
mm.
point you get the first mortar round shot at you, and then you get the first rocket shot at you, and then you get the first near ambush, the first far ambush. Like there's always a
Yeah.
new first, and you try to train for everything. But there's always going to be some unexpected things that happen, no matter how well you're prepared and how well you
Yeah.
think you have trained. There's always a new first, no matter you could have been doing it for 20, 30 years, and you get to a point and you're like, wow, I haven't dealt with this exact scenario before. But I think,
Yeah.
the leadership's principle based. Did we train for it? Are we communicating well? How are we trying to set the conditions to be successful?
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I hadn't told this story in years.
Yeah. It's been a few years since we were young lieutenants.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a few.
Well, I think next time we join, I'll share one of my stories as a young lieutenant and
Yeah, man.
explain kind of some of my learning points, and hopefully y'all can relate to some of these scenarios and some of these principles of leadership that will help you out in your journey.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Y'all have a good one.